Hi everyone, this is Jerry from the Chess Network. I'm a National Master in Chess from the state of Pennsylvania, and this is a video on how to play chess. This is the initial setup whenever you're ready to go ahead and play a game of chess. What we have on the bottom of the board are the letters A through H, and along the left side of the board we have the numbers 1 through 8. Now the first piece I'd like to go over is the rook. The rook I have placed on the square E5. And from E5 it can move to any of the following squares that these blue lines touch. The rook moves in a plus direction or up, down, left, right direction. The rook is said to be worth 5 points. Next we have the bishop, and the bishop I have just placed on the square D4. From D4 it can move to any of the following squares that these blue lines touch. The bishop moves in an X direction or diagonally. The bishop is worth 3 points. Next we have the queen, and the queen I've just placed on the square C5, and from C5 she can move just like the rook in a plus direction or up, down, left, right direction, or just like the bishop in an X direction or diagonally. So she has many different options, and because of this the queen holds a value of 9 points. Next we have the knight, and the knight is on the square E4. From E4 it has the following options. It can move to any of these squares I have highlighted in red. The knight is the only piece that can jump over other pieces, meaning that if there were any pieces here where I have outlined in blue right next to the knight, it is not bothered because it simply jumps over those pieces to arrive on these squares I have highlighted in red. Now, how exactly does the knight arrive on these red squares? What is the pattern it takes? Well, if you take a look, it's 2 squares and then a square like this, or an L shape. And if we flip that L one way or another, we have the knight arriving on that square, this square, like that. So the knight moves in an L shape, and it's the only piece that can jump over other pieces. The knight from this position has 8 different choices, and the knight is worth 3 points. The next piece I'd like to discuss is the king. Now the king I have placed on the square D4. The objective of chess is to checkmate our opponent's king. Now by checkmate I'm referring to attacking our opponent's king and having there be no escape. Now by escape I'm referring to the black king not being able to somehow or another, either himself or his other pieces, capture the checking piece or block the checking piece, and by block I mean place a piece in between the king and the checking piece on one of those squares, or simply move out of the way to a square that is safe. Okay, if the king cannot do any 3 of those mentioned statements, then the position is considered checkmate. The actual capturing of the king does not occur. Checkmate is when the king is in check and there is no successful way of getting that king to a safe square. The king is similar to the queen in that it moves in an up, down, left, right direction, just like the rook, or just like the bishop, diagonally or in an X direction. The only difference really is that he can only move 1 step at a time, 1 square at a time. The king does not have a particular value. It is said to be priceless, because if you lose the king, you simply lose the game. Now, we have a special move in chess, and that special move is called castling. Castling involves both the king and the rook. Now, in order for castling to take place, there are many rules that must be followed. One of which is that the king nor the corresponding rook can have moved at all. That's one thing. Another thing is that the squares that the king travels on must not be guarded by the enemy pieces. Also, the king must not be in check. You cannot castle out of check. By check, I mean the king cannot be threatened by the enemy piece and move out of check. So this is how the actual castling would look. The king moves 2 squares, and the rook is going to come on the other side of the king, right next to the king, just like that. That would be considered kingside castling, and we'll castle queenside with black. It's black's move now, so black 1, 2 squares, and the rook is going to come on the other side of the king. Now the only piece that we have yet to discuss here is the pawn, and the pawn is maybe one of the more difficult pieces to explain. The pawns are worth 1 point, and the pawns are unique in that they move in one direction, however they capture in a completely different direction. So take for example this setup here, where it's just the pawns, and the pawns are all on their original squares. It's white's move in this position, and white with the pawn on e2 here can move either 1 or 2 squares forward, because it is his very first move on the square, from the square e2. Now from that point on, okay, let's say black makes a pawn move. From this point on, this pawn here, since it had already moved, it can only move 1 square at a time from now on. 1 square forward. Okay? Now it's black's move. Black can go here, and we'll make a white move here, and now it's black's move. And in this position, you might think that the black pawn on e7 can capture the pawn, but it cannot, because pawns move forward, but they capture 1 space diagonally. Pawns only move forward, they can never move backwards. And since it's black's move in this position, with the last move being pawn to e6, black actually can go ahead and capture the pawn like this with the f7 pawn, or like this with the d7 pawn. They capture 1 square diagonally. One neat thing about the pawns are that once they arrive on their final rank, and by final rank I'm referring to any of the white pawns getting to this last rank and any of the black pawns getting to their last rank, what happens is what's called pawn promotion. And what pawn promotion means is that once a pawn arrives on that last rank, it can turn into either a queen, knight, bishop, or rook. Now the very last thing to discuss is what's called en passant. And en passant involves the pawns and the pawns alone. Okay, in this position, let's say that white chooses to move 2 squares with his pawn, like this. Black can actually capture that pawn on it as if it were on the square f3. Now why is this possible? Well, it's just an additional rule that we have for the pawns. It's called en passant, and the 2 requirements that must be met are the person or the player moving his pawn from its original square 2 squares and have them being side by side. Both requirements must be met in order for this en passant move to occur. Okay? It is not enough, for example, if white moves here, black moves here, and now it's white's move and white were to go here, having only moved 1 square, the black pawn cannot capture this pawn. Again, both requirements must be met. Pawn having moved 2 squares, them being side by side on an adjacent file, and then you can actually go ahead and capture. You only have 1 opportunity. So if white if white moves his pawn 2 squares like this, black has the option right now or never to go ahead and capture this pawn here. That concludes this video on how to play chess. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, feel free to contact me at www.myspace.com/chesseducator, and if you already have a MySpace account, feel free to send a friend request or simply just leave a comment on YouTube. That's all for now. Thanks.